welcome to your
Yeah,
show.
welcome to a fun horror talk. You and I, even when I'm on your show, even when we're having like serious discussions, we always veer off into music. We always veer off into some sort of pop culture realm. We're around the same age. We definitely like a lot of the same stuff. You're a fan of horror movies. What makes a good
Yeah.
horror movie to you?
Oh, that's hard. My three favorite horror movies may make it a little clearer. I think I love Gothic by Ken Russell. I love The Brood
Oh,
by Cronenberg,
okay.
and
Deep cut.
then I think Texas Chainsaw is probably the quintessential horror movie because it's a movie that is super suspenseful. And yet, when you watch it, you realize that the first time you see it, you think it's the most gory thing you've ever seen, and you go back and watch it, like, no, actually, there's no gore in it. It tricked you. It was just so suspenseful that you thought there was. It was all implied. Um, there's not that many movies that can pull that off, and that's why it's never been successfully remade. And then it leads to one of my other favorite horror movies, which is Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2, which is a quintessential horror comedy where the horror and the comedy are actually about
Yeah,
balance, which is hard to do. I mean, parts of that movie are ridiculous, but you know it's supposed to be. So,
I love Texas Chainsaw 2. I actually saw 2 first. I bought 2 with Christmas money when I was a kid. The VHS. You know how you get like your little Christmas, well, maybe you.
yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But still, you get your whatever holiday funds, and I went to Kmart back when they were still Kmart. I don't think if that's have been around anymore, and it was in like a bin, and I was like, I got it. And then I ended up watching the original on cable one night, and the original scared the bejesus out of me. That John Larroquette voiceover in the beginning is terrifying. Um,
Oh, yeah.
Mark Owen says, "You ruined my Sonny Bono wig." I love Texas Chainsaw too. Um,
I believe that's the one I saw first too, and then was shocked to go back and watch the first one and realize they were both directed by the same person for one thing.
yeah,
But and the massive tone shift between those two movies. I mean, the only other movies that I think successfully pull a tone shift that well between 1 and 2 is Alien and Aliens. And that is that's a huge tone shift
you
as
don't
well.
think Terminator does a good job?
Yeah, I guess I could say that. Do you consider Terminator a horror movie?
Yes,
Like that's a
yes.
good question.
Terminator 1 is one of the most frightening movies I saw as a young person. My parents divorced when I was very young, and my
Mhm.
father, he had me on the weekends. Interesting man, my father, and we would go to the video store. This is way before Blockbuster, and he would be like, "Pick whatever you want to see," and I'd pick something I wanted to see, and he's like, "No, you can't see that." And it wasn't like it was bad. It was like he didn't want to watch it. So he was like, "We're gonna watch Terminator." I was like 6 or 7, maybe 8, and
Yeah.
I just remember watching that movie, and Arnold Schwarzenegger was a monster to me. He was a villain to me until I went to the theater to see 2, I think. Then he stopped being a villain in my eyes.
I saw 2 first. I think the interesting thing about every movie that we mentioned,
Mhm.
uh, because of my age, which is just like 2 years younger than you, but it would have hit me just slightly different because those 2 years would have been important in the '80s. I saw the second one of every one of those movies. Saw Aliens before I saw
Mhm.
Alien. I saw Terminator 2 before I saw Terminator, and I saw Texas Chainsaw
Two
way after I saw Texas Chainsaw
mhm.
2. Um, and yeah, maybe an '80s thing. People are throwing out other movies, Gremlins and Gremlins 2. Although the thing is with Gremlins and Gremlins 2 is Gremlins is a horror comedy. Gremlins 2 is like a farce. So I mean, that's kind of scary, not really, like
Yeah.
Um,
Grim.
but
Both
yeah,
of those movies, I think, are like these fun films. There's a weird point though in the early 80s with all the Star Wars knockoffs and Alien knockoffs, because you have these two movies that really hit big. Star Wars is a maybe not Oscar winning phenomenon, but it's a huge blockbuster phenomenon. Science fiction films aren't supposed to make money like this. And everybody tries to cash in, and everybody's cash in doesn't work. I mean, Disney of all people has an extremely failed cash in. For those that remember movie The Black Hole,
oh god, I do
I
remember
mean,
that
I
movie.
watched The Black Hole if I saw it on TV. I tried to watch it with my young son, the little guy, and he just wasn't digging it. It's a slow paced movie that was a little all over the place.
I think I saw it at a friend's house on the Disney Channel in the early 90s.
And you were like,
Like,
"What the hell is this?" Like,
yeah, it's like this is weird Disney space horror,
yeah,
like for kids.
it's almost like a it's they were all over the place. And Alien is what, 79, so before Empire, but it's definitely during the bonanza of Star Wars and all the kind of wannabe Star Wars knockoffs. And it's written as a space horror movie. It's not supposed to be a science fiction film. And it actually wins awards. It won an Oscar for something, I'm not sure, maybe special effects.
Mhm.
Um, but that movie, I watched it actually before we went on, and it's a horror movie. It's just a horror movie in outer space.
I mean, it's no Event Horizon or Pandemonium, but yeah, it. I mean, and it is from a time. I think we do have to remind ourselves that like there were children's horror or young adult
Mhm.
horror movies in the 80s. That's like the last. I mean, they've tried to bring them back in the last decade or so, but like Poltergeist, if we remember, even though I as a child in the 80s, I found the first two of those movies terrifying.
Terrifying.
Uh, those were made for kids,
Yeah.
effectively.
Amblin. Those
Like,
are I don't know if they're I think they're Amblin movies. I think
yeah,
that, Spielberg creates the PG-13 rating, and we kinda have to remember PG movies before the PG-13. You can have curse words, nudity. PG-13 movies. Go back and watch a PG-13 movie pre or a PG movie pre-1984.
yeah. I can tell you a story about that. That's pretty hilarious. When I taught I teach in Utah, and I taught in a school. And in this school, there was a hard rule, like you could show any movie that's PG without getting um, a signature, and it was a film class. And so I showed Reds and Cabaret because they're both PG.
Mhm.
Um,
Were there some letters to the principal after that?
no, I got away with it, which is amazing. But yeah, there should have been letters to the principal, but I is Gremlins is one of the first movies that got the PG-13. I don't think it's the one that initiated it.
No,
It
Indiana
was a
Jones and the Temple of Doom.
Indiana Jones, yeah, and the Temple of Doom did. Another movie that messed around with tone and tried to be a horror movie, kind of.
Golema. Yeah. Uh-oh.
So yeah, it the 80s isn't like I'm a movie snob, and
Mhm.
I am in my head. There are two wolves, one of which is a Criterion collection, and the other which is like what's ever on Shutter.
Yeah.
Um, and it just tells you a lot about me. Um, but I grew up watching, like thinking about like this big shift, because 70s movies are my Criterion brain,
Mhm.
but 80s movies is Shutter brain. Like they're and I don't want to say that they're actually not good films, because they particularly in the early 80s, when once they got out of 70s mode, and I think how they got out of 70s mode is the movies that you're talking about, like what brings the blockbusters Jaws, but what brings like 80s movies as we think about them as Star Wars
Yep.
and Alien.
Yep.
Um and there's this period of like really well made schlock, like people have really who cut their teeth on B movies for reels and drive-throughs in the 70s, who are cut their teeth watching them,
Mhm.
but take that aesthetic and then make amazing movies out of it. I mean, the most
Cameron.
up Cameron
Cameron
Carpenter
comes out of that, yeah.
Carpenter
Carpenter,
comes out of
yeah.
that.
Craven, all these
Yeah,
guys come out of that. No, you're
yeah.
right.
Craven comes out of that and porn, but
Yeah.
but you get this kind of this mixture, and specifically with someone like Craven's referencing art house movies.
Mhm.
Um, but um, yeah, uh, those are also two fair. You asked me in the beginning what defines a horror movie. I should have actually mentioned Possession and Suspiria as also both being on my top. Like I could just go
We
layer
could
by
go on
layer
forever. There's no there look, a
on.
top 3 is extremely interchangeable, and I think it's foolish for us to think that we can
Like,
simply have an easy top 3. I don't have an easy top 3. I have movies that I'm into at the moment, which you can throw on. I wouldn't say for example, I wouldn't say Poltergeist.
hmm
And if you were over here and you're like, dude, let's watch Poltergeist, I'm like, oh, this is like my favorite movie. You know what I mean? It's one of those things for me.
Last time that we hung out together, we watched Ken Russell's Lair of the White Worm.
That's
So
right. We were at Dubin's.
yeah.
And I was following us that first of all, anyone watching the show right now, I don't know if you guys, I'm sure there's a lot of people watching this, especially this episode, that fall asleep to movies. Don't try to fall asleep to Ken Russell.
No,
Don't do it.
I woke up in a weird snake orgy. Like
I would
so,
just kind of randomly doze off and wake up like, oh, that snake lady bite that guy's dick off. Ugh.
is it like, did I wake up and there was a Roman orgy going on and someone got eaten by a snake?
Yeah,
Like,
like Ken Russell movies, just don't do it. Do not do it. Um, so I think you're getting into something I did want to ask you. Do you think the oversaturation of popcorn, low budget horror taint the genre? Or has it always been a second tier genre from the Universal monster days and the Hammer House of Horror eras?
I don't know that it was all. I mean, it's hard to say if for example, I mean, Universal Monsters wasn't second tier until the Hays Code, and they had to make them funny.
Mhm.
Um, Hammer House of Horror. I mean, it's just high gothic. I don't consider them second tier either. Some of them are bad. I
Mhm.
don't know how many versions of Carmilla you can actually make, but I would say uh, they go in and out. I mean, one of the things about a horror movie is unlike sci-fi, they're remarkably cheap to make.
Mhm.
They're great first films, and I think what part of what tastes the genre is the end of the Universal horror era, and then like that middle period of Hammer,
Mhm.
up into the 60s before Hammer gets interesting again, where it's like um we are as salacious as we can be, but we're not that salacious, lots of
Mhm.
heaving bosoms, but but we're obviously shooting night and the day.
Mhm.
Um and I think it was a genre that lended itself to being a second stream on a drive through. Um because to make a high end uh sci-fi movie just costs a lot of money. I mean, like,
Yeah.
uh even back then, and when you watch cheap horror movies now, from like the 70s, some of them don't stand out for how cheap they were made. Like they really, they don't. I watched a lot of the Romero movies that everyone forgets, Marty and what is it, Season of the Witch.
Mhm.
And I watched those recently, and they weren't made with any money at all.
Mhm.
But you really kind of can't tell compared to everything else. I mean, they're not like Rosemary's Baby or anything, but you really can't tell. Whereas like old castle movies, if you
Ooh,
like,
yeah.
those are fun,
Mhm.
but they look cheap now. But go watch a Leslie Nielsen, and people think I'm referring to him as a comedian, but actually in the 60s and 70s, he was mostly in like sci-fi movies.
A very serious
Um,
actor. Yeah.
yeah, and he was a very serious actor. Um, those Leslie Nielsen cheap sci-fi movies from the late 60s, early 70s look so much older
Mhm.
than the horror movies from the same time period. Like just day and night difference. You think about something, even something that's fairly high budget for the time period, like Forbidden Planet, and watch it by a movie just a few years older. Uh, the Dawn of the not Dawn of the Dead, Night of Living Dead.
Mhm.
And tell me which one looks better now. You know,
Mhm.
it's I think that has an attraction to it because you can put them together pretty cheaply. Also, once the Hays Code was away, you could be sleazy about it, and you didn't have to be all as good as Hitchcock and just imply sleazy. You could just do it. Um,
Is Hitchcock the master of horror or suspense?
you were
Right?
gonna get into like how to divide the suspense horror line. In some ways, I think he's. I mean, obviously, he's a master of suspense, but in some ways, if you watch some of his late movies, you definitely get the feeling that he's almost just out and out in pure horror. To me, the master of horror of that time period, um, is actually someone we can't mention anymore because he's a very very bad person. But
Roman Polanski?
Roman Polanski, um,
Rosemary's Baby is it's good.
yeah,
You can't front on Rosemary's Baby. Like,
yeah,
also
um,
that takes place before the incidents happened with him.
yeah. You can watch that with a fairly clean conscience, but
Maybe not the ninth gate, that's a
yeah.
difference.
I mean, I have seen that movie, but I didn't know
Mhm.
because I think I saw that in high school and I didn't
I
know
didn't know
that.
that was Polanski either. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, it's unfortunate. A lot of my favorite movies are Polanski movies, but nonetheless, I would still have him in prison. Um, all that said, I think horror movies also the gamut of what counts as we get into like suspense or thrillers. I am still yet to figure out the exact line between a realistic slasher movie, a suspense thriller, a suspense movie with a
Mhm.
murderer like Psycho, and a thriller. Like, even if you write down like the various film elements, and I've taught film before,
Mhm.
there's not really the elements are the same in all those three cases in almost all aspects, and yet there's a vibe difference between them, that's pretty much the only thing I can say is the difference.
Mhm.
Like, it's down to like little choices in like filmography or acting choices are but on paper they're almost identical, and yet Psycho versus Single White Female versus, oh, I don't know, Rope by Hitchcock.
Mhm.
Um, and so I mean, Psycho's the excellent one. Is it a suspense movie or is it a horror movie?
It starts off with a very horrific intro, right? You kill off the star, which we don't really see again till Scream.
Yeah,
Um, and I I think Psycho 1 is more of a horror movie than the sequel.
yeah.
The sequel, which I really enjoyed, Psycho 2, I thought was really, really good. Um, that's a little different. There's not a lot of violence in it. It takes so long for a kill to even happen because you have to get the whole gaslighting thing really set in, and they set it in so good that you're just kind of following this continuing story of Norman Bates. Um, I don't know. I've always felt like horror for me isn't necessarily just a genre, because a lot of the horror movies that I watch, horror movies, quotations,
Mm.
I laugh at. And a lot of people that go watch like over the top slashers, especially by the time you get to stuff like Freddy vs. Jason. Me and Ben sat here and watched Freddy vs. Jason, and I had saw it when it came out and I didn't remember it. And I watched it just sitting down, no devices, nothing stopping me from enjoying the film. And I just kept going, this is what it is. And it's really good at being what it is. It's not trying to be smart. It's not trying to, you know, terrify me with mood. It is what I want as a fan of these, you know, characters. Um, and I think there's genres of movies now like that. Like you like these kind of schlocky slasher blood fest movies with interesting kills. We'll make them for you, and that's what you got in the '80s. But we call it horror, and I think because it's called horror, when people weren't scared because it was, you know what's coming.
Yeah.
Um, then people, I don't like horror. It doesn't scare me. Like how many times have you heard someone say that?
Yeah, I think there's two periods of horror that do that, frankly.
Mhm.
The mid to late 80s, when you get you know, the three slasher trilogies that have up to like 10 sequels and like 9 of them come out in 3 years.
Yeah,
Like,
the cash ins.
yeah, I mean, like Friday the 13th is an example. Like I think the first 3 of those movies are pretty brilliant. And then, they get good again, like around Freddy versus Jason. It was a lot of years later. But like by the time you're going to Manhattan in space, you got a problem. It's they get so far removed. We talk about watching stuff out of order. Like I didn't see the first Friday the 13th movie until I was an adult
Mhm.
and realized how different of a movie it is. It feels a lot more like a 70s movie. I mean, which I guess it kind of makes sense because it
And
was.
again, no one knows. Let's remember when I can't remember the guy's name that makes Friday the 13th. Oh, his name is slipping me. Anyway, when he makes that movie, he's like, "Hey, this Halloween thing is taking off," and he sends his buddy to go watch Friday the 13th or to go watch Halloween. And it's like, "Tell me what's it about," and then we're gonna make our own little version of Halloween. And they make Friday the 13th, and you know that goes off.
Yeah,
Halloween, the sequel to Halloween, I think is horrible.
which one?
The
Like,
first Halloween 2, Carpenter doesn't want to make because Carpenter's like, I ended the movie. It's over.
right.
And they're like, nope. You made what is it? $300,000 budget. You made 30 million. You're an earner. The movie industry's like the mob. You're an earner now. We got to get another one of these.
Like the mob. Anyway, go ahead.
I was
um,
trying to be subtle. And then Friday the 13th, for whatever reason, there is a lot of other of these the original name of Halloween is the babysitter murders,
yeah.
right? So there's a lot more of these kind of slasher films that are coming out to the point where I think Friday the 14th or Saturday the 14th, I think it's called, the parody comes out in like 84.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing how like you go watch Black Christmas and Sleepaway Camp, and
Mm,
I mean there's tons of these coming out in the late 70s, early 80s. Um, some of them predate Halloween, but Halloween really gets the formula down, and it actually, unfortunately for me, I saw Halloween after I'd seen all these other slashers, so it was not the revelation
yeah.
that it is if you watch it clean. Um, what is it? Prom Night's another one.
Ooh,
There's just so many.
ooh.
Um, huh?
And these movies don't have the thing that is going to be the character that's going to come back for whatever reason, and I don't know what that thing is. None of us really know what that thing is because Michael Myers, and then you have Jason Voorhees, and you don't even get Jason Voorhees until the second film.
Yeah, I mean he's not in the first. I mean his
Yeah.
hand is in the first film.
It's Pamela Voorhees, right?
Yeah.
It's mom. It's his mom is the killer in the first movie. And again, that movie was made like the other movies from Alien and Terminator. Those movies weren't made to be franchises.
No, they were not.
That was the last